Hello and good afternoon from the Almeida Theatre. Thank you for watching this Zoom recording, which is part of Six Artists in Search for Play. My name is Atri Banerjee, and I've been one of the 6 artists looking for a play. And this is, I'm very delighted to be joined today by Zaidi, Manjula Padmanabhan, and Prarthana Purkayastha. I'll just go around and let the panel introduce themselves, but I think generally we're going to be speaking about, well, the discussion is broadly titled The Role of Women in the Indian Theatre Landscape, but I'm quite interested to hear from Annie and from Manjula about their plays, Name, Place, Animal Thing, and Hidden Fires, which we've been working on this week. We did a reading of Name, Place, Animal Thing on Wednesday. We're doing a reading of Hidden Fires this evening. And just to say right now, I'm probably the most novice here in terms of my knowledge and experience. So I'm very interested to learn from the panel and hear what you have to say rather than me doing lots of talking. But yeah, should we go to Annie first?
Hi. So in brief, my name, of course, you know, Annie Zaidi. I trained as a journalist and I continue to have like one finger in journalism. I also write fiction and nonfiction and a bunch of other things. I've been writing plays for the last 10 years. I do not do, I'm mainly a writer. I'm not also a theater director or an actor. So my engagement with theater is mostly limited just to writing.
Thank you. We had a really fun time doing Name Place a couple of days ago. And am I right in thinking it's never been performed before? Is that?
No. Name, Place, Animal Thing was the first full-length play I wrote. I tried to write a few skits and things when I was an undergraduate, and then I kind of stopped being involved with theater for 10 years. And then when I went back to wanting to write scripts, Name, Place, Animal Thing was something I wrote, and I entered it for a competition and it got shortlisted. It didn't win, but it got shortlisted, and that gave me the confidence that, okay, so I can do this, I can write plays. And then I kept writing other plays, which did get performed, but because it was the first, I think it just sort of was neglected quite a bit. And I myself did not do much more by way of, you know, pushing the script and taking it places and things like that. So I'm very happy that the Almeida Theatre has had a reading now.
Yes, it was brilliant. Really enjoyed it. Let's go to Manjula now. How are you doing?
Hello, and thank you for asking me to attend this panel discussion. My name is Manjula Padmanabhan. Quite often when people see my name, they blanch and say, oh my goodness, how do I pronounce that? But it's actually quite easy. Anyway, I'm an author and artist. I sometimes add playwright and cartoonist, but you know, in a sense, they're all the same thing. One, you know, I draw and I write. I spend much of the year in the US. I have been writing and drawing for an extremely long time. I have still running a comic strip in one of the Madras newspapers. I've been writing plays for a long time, but very recently there has been a published compendium, a 2-volume compendium of my work as a playwright, and I have published novels and short stories. I live in the US, in the very small town, but somewhat well-known town of Newport, Rhode Island. Famously, it was where the first movie version of The Great Gatsby was filmed, and the novel is set somewhere close by. So it, you know, when people look sort of blank when I say Newport, I say Great Gatsby. You know, remember Great Gatsby, the green light across the bay. Anyway, I vary my time between drawing and writing. The play that the monologue that I believe you are performing tonight in the UK has been performed a number of times before because it's part of a set called Hidden Fires, the title of the monologue that you're doing today. What can I say? It was written in 2003, I think. It's been performed on and off. I very rarely see the performances of my work, partly because I don't like to. And I'm quite happy that they just do what I rarely like the interpretations, but I also don't believe in interfering, because if I did interfere, I'd really want to muck in there. So, and I feel, I believe in today's world, everyone wants their shot at creativity. So, okay. But I'm not bound to like the results. Sometimes I do. I could keep going, but I'll stop here.
I've, in my own work, I found a very interesting relationship between writers and directors, and how some writers who want to be very involved and some writers who don't want to be involved at all. So it's pleasure to. I
mean, I prefer, if I'm not going to be, if I'm allowed to not be involved, then I don't want to see. Because it is unpleasant to see distortions, but it happens. Sometimes I like the results. Sometimes. A week ago, a Brazilian company did one of the 5 hidden fires. They did points. They did in video, and in COVID isolation. They did it in Portuguese, and it was brilliant. It was really fun to see that.
Wow, in Portuguese. Did they have
yes,
subtitles?
They had subtitles. Since September last year, we a foundation called the Prakriti Foundation in Chennai, and Annie, I'm sure they'll be interested in your work. Have been doing every month. Have been doing a reading from one of my plays at the end on the last Saturday of every month, and so every month there's a short video from one of my pieces. And it's been quite interesting to see the huge variation in performances and interpretations. As I said, some of it has been fun. Not
Thank you.
But I'm grateful. I'm grateful. And I think that's going to be the subject of our discussion today. I'm grateful that they're being done at all.
Yeah. Sorry, I'll move on to Prarthana. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you. And it's just really wonderful to be in such great company on a Saturday afternoon here in Britain. Thank you for inviting me, Almeida Theatre in Atri. My name's Prarthana. Bengali pronunciation is Prarthana, but there are many mutant variants of that name circulating in this country. But yeah, Prarthana or Prarthana is fine. I am senior lecturer in the Department of Drama, Theatre and Dance at Royal Holloway, University of London. And I've been working there in that department since 2015, so almost 6 years now. Before that, I taught in Plymouth. Before that, I taught in De Montfort. I completed my PhD in this country on scholarship from India, and my thesis was later turned into my first single-authored monograph, which is called Indian Modern Dance, Feminism and Transnationalism. It was published in 2014 by Palgrave Macmillan. And within my thesis and in that book, I trace a genealogy of modern experimental dance and theatre practice, primarily coming out of Bengal, which is where I grew up in. So a little bit about my background in India. My parents moved to Bengal when I was 6. I was born in Assam, but when I was 6, my parents relocated to Bengal, fleeing ethnic tension there between the Assamese and the Bengalis. but my family traced their origins to the other side of Bengal, what is now known as Bangladesh. I basically call Calcutta my home. That's where I grew up in, and I grew up in a city that was seeped in theatre practice, and which gave birth to some of the most iconic playwrights, theatre makers, and theatre companies known in the eastern part of India. I trained in contemporary dance, which was called a contemporary dance form by two feminist practitioners, and their names were Manjusri Chaki Sarkar, or Shorkar in Bengali, and her daughter Ranjabati Shorkar. And my artistic home was the Dancers Guild, which was a place of dance and theatre collaboration. And essentially, I spent my teens and my early 20s training with Manjumashi and Ranjabi, as I called them. So my early years of training in dance and theatre was within a feminist collective in sort of like late 1980s, early 1990s Calcutta. And that was the environment where I became kind of like attuned to a praxis of theatre, which was led by women, which mainly was kind of looking at feminist adaptations of often male-authored plays, but significant nonetheless. And then, yeah, once I relocated to the United Kingdom, I just got fully immersed in an academic life. So my practice as a movement director, as a choreographer for theatre companies, which I used to be sort of engaged in Calcutta, that has kind of taken a very strong backseat. And I'm primarily an academic. I'm surrounded by students all the time and my colleagues in the theatre department. So this is absolutely joyful for me to be surrounded by actors and playwrights and directors. So thank you for inviting me here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Prarthana. Brilliant. Yeah, I'm feeling quite overwhelmed to be in such company on a Saturday afternoon on this like transatlantic Zoom. Just to give you a bit of context for the project that the Almeida was doing, it was sort of, I think it was about exploring different theatrical traditions from around the world. And that was the sort of starting point, but obviously that's quite a broad premise to start from. And I was sort of brought in to look at Indian theatre. And obviously Indian theatre sort of however many millennia, however many different languages, however many different. So it was a process of discovery and a process of searching for a play, which is why the season is called 6 Artists Search for Play. And just to give you a bit of background on myself, my parents are from Kolkata, and they both moved here when my dad was about 19 and my mum was about 21, both to study. So my relationship to India has always been quite strong because I go back pretty much, I mean, obviously pandemic notwithstanding, I used to go back about once a year. And my grandmother still lives in Kolkata at the moment. And she actually used to be an actor in the 60s in Kolkata group theatre, and sort of, and I think there's always been sort of a link to Indian theatre in my own head and in my own practice. But I think the thing that happens is that obviously there's so much writing about the diaspora in this country, but there isn't very much writing that's actually come from India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. And so I was quite interested in bringing that to light and actually bringing, rather than looking at sort of an old Sanskrit play or something ancient, I wanted to really look at something really contemporary. And that's how I came across Annie and Manjula's work. Because actually in this country, it's kind of only Anupama Chandrasekhar and Abhishek Majumdar who are done here. So it's been a real privilege to explore your work, actually. But I guess sort of like I said, the topic of the discussion is sort of women's writing in the Indian theatre landscape, and that might be too broad, but I'm just sort of very sort of interested in terms of like, what do you, both as practitioners and as academics, what is your experience of women's writing? Because I think I was quite conscious that when I was researching the canon, many of the writers I was coming across were all men, and sort of I think that's a discussion that's happening in the theatre landscape across the entire world. But I was just curious as to what your perspective was from in the Indian. I mean, maybe let's start with Annie as someone who's in India at the moment.
Atri, your voice is very faint, so I think I heard you correctly, but I can barely hear. I think you were asking about women's theatre practice, or did I get that wrong?
No, that's right. Can you hear me any better now if I speak up a bit?
Slightly better. Yeah, slightly better now.
I think he wants you to talk about Indian women's theatre practice. And as the one person who is in India at the moment, you are best placed to talk about the experiences of women in India in theatre, and I suppose specifically playwrights.
Okay, I heard that. Okay. Right. So about women in theatre in India, I cannot really speak as a theatre practitioner, partly because I'm on the margins. Partly because of my journalism work, I have never given up journalism. I tried to balance the two when I started out. I kept trying to get involved and attend rehearsals and tried to do some backstage work. But journalism is one of those things that you either do it or you don't do it. You can't do it on the margins. And I was completely thrown into journalism from the beginning. When I started to freelance as a writer, that was when I could find the time to devote to writing. One of the things about me, and I think that I can say this of the majority of women's experience in India, theatre is not a mainstream experience for people in this country. It is a bit of a leisure experience, you can say. Some people get to experience some form of indigenous theatre maybe once or twice a year, usually around festivals. So you might have, like you have the jatras in Bengal, etc. In Assam, of course, there's quite a movement. But these are traveling theatre companies, and because by and large people don't have the money to support theatre, it's not like every town has its own theatre, and it's not like there are performances happening through the year. I grew up without watching a single professional play. I think I watched my first play when I was a teenager, and even that was a very, you can say, privileged experience, because my grandfather happened to take me and he happened to have passes, and that's like 1% of the population who has access to that kind of thing. So it was only when I moved to Bombay. Until then, all the theatre that I had seen and participated in was theatre, some form of self-made theatre. You know, in school, you are encouraged to do plays. So if you get to be a part of a school play, then you have access to whatever passes for theatre, you know. But I had no exposure to in theatre of any kind. I didn't even have access to Shakespearean dramas, for example. It wasn't even that. There was just nothing. We did Cinderella and Snow White and things like that as kids in school. But we read a lot of plays. I did grow up reading a lot of texts. Shakespeare, of course, but a lot of the moderns also, Arthur Miller and Ibsen and so on. Indian theatre, after college, I began to read a little bit. Vijay Tendulkar, Badal Sarkar, etc. Women were more or less missing even then, even as text. I think Manjula actually was the first Indian woman playwright whose name I'd heard of and whose work I liked and enjoyed. And enjoyed in the sense the way you enjoy powerful theatre. A lot of her plays were the sort that completely shake you up, and they left me very shaken. Not fun, but good, you know, good and powerful. And when I moved to Bombay, I started to look at the professional stage. Even that was not often feminist or not necessarily shaped by women. Women were there as actors, much more often as actors rather than as theatre makers. Fewer directors. Even now, I can count them on the fingers of my hand, the number of female directors and writers whose works get staged in Bombay even now. And Mumbai is one of the most thriving theatre scenes in the country. We have theatre in 4 languages, at least until the pandemic. We did have a thriving theatre scene. 4 languages, English, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, were being performed regularly in the city. But even then, the feminine experience and perspective is not entirely absent, but very much in the shadows, I would say. I know of only 3 or 4 women, contemporary women playwrights, my own contemporaries, whose works I've seen on stage. The others tend to move into direction or into production, but they don't necessarily write their own plays. This is how it is, at least in Mumbai, where I've spent the last 15 years. So I know a little bit about Mumbai. Everywhere else in the country that I know of, theatre still remains something which is quite limited. And I don't recall having seen productions written and directed by women anywhere else.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I'll try and speak up. Can you hear me better now, Annie?
Yes.
Great. It was interesting. I mean, one of the things that this season was quite interested in exploring is what is the idea of a classic and what are the things that are in the canon and not in the canon. And I was reading an interview with you, Annie, where you mentioned Manjula's name, and I thought it would be interesting to put the 2 of you together in the same week to see how those, I mean, Name, Place, Animal Thing and Hidden Fires are 2 very different texts, but sort of how those 2 things are in dialogue and in discourse with each other. I mean, Manjula, how does it feel having your collected plays published in a volume now, and sort of where do you, as someone who lives in America part of the time, where do you sit in this dialogue or this discourse? Do you have any strong sense?
Yes, I have strong views. But before we go any further, I feel that Annie is very slightly underplaying herself. Annie won a giant prize last year for one of her plays. So Annie is definitely in the lights, and it is a huge achievement to keep working at being a playwright when there is so little to support one. Now, I'd like to make a point, which is that it's hard, whether you're a man or a woman or transgender, to make playwriting or theater one's profession. As we all know, actors find their way. But if you're writing theater, I would say the overwhelming reason that it is hard for specifically women to make a living as a playwright is that it's very difficult to make a living as a playwright. And because you can't make a living, and most people of whatever gender who are interested in writing something that looks like a script, even if they would prefer the stage, typically they are pushed towards film and television. And theater is a very different discipline. And one of the realizations I had a very long time ago was, it's all very well for people to say, wouldn't you love your play, your script to be made into a film? And I realized a very long time ago that no, I wouldn't. Because what happens when someone takes your script and makes it into a film and or TV show, the attention immediately swings towards the director of that film, not the playwright. How often do you look for the name of the screenplay writer at the end of a show? You don't. I mean, only the screenplay writer and her family will notice that credit line. You notice the director, you notice the main actors. And it's an unfortunate shift. I remember watching a famous Indian director called Govind Nihalani shooting one of my plays. And I remember saying with some it was very, one is supposed to be extremely grateful, and I was, and Govind is a very dear friend. But I remember saying, the end result is my seeds, but his garden. It's not, the end result is not mine. And in theater, by contrast, it remains mine. And my name is the one that appears under the title. And that matters to me. And to go back to the issue of women in theater, women writing theater, I would make a statement that perhaps can be argued over, that women who when we reach the level of confidence required to be a writer at all, I think many of us are very ambitious. We've got to make our way in life. We need to earn the respect of the people around us and other professionals. And we don't have much time to waste on activities that don't earn a good living. I as it so happens, my discipline in college, where I did a BA in economics and an MA in history. And that BA in economics, I was a terrible student, but I learned one thing from economics, which is that the price matters. It matters a lot. And I talk all through my life, I'm 67, I talk all the time about money, that money actually matters. Artists are, a lot of people look a little shocked that I discuss money so much, but it is integral to continuing to do what one does. And many women, even if they wish to write scripts, very soon become discouraged, not only that they don't get performed, but because, and again, I have to stop and say, one reason they might not get performed is even if the play is very good, it might not earn any money. So even with the best intentions, productions cannot go on stage. And, unless you have an audience, unless you have paying advertisers, unless you have someone supporting you, the play is not going to do well. And if it doesn't do well, then it's not going to have more than one night, 2 nights. This whole issue of success, it's not just fame, it is to do with money. So I recognize that to talk about money is always regarded as sort of vulgar, but I'll be vulgar, I don't care. And I'll say that it's crucial to find a way of making a living otherwise it's just a hobby, which is what everyone says in a slightly, oh, it's a hobby. Do you write as a hobby? And God forbid you're married, because if you're married, which in fact I am, you're treated as if, well, you're doing this in your spare time. It's only because over the very long period of time that I have continued to work, it is, I suppose, reasonably clear that this is how I make a living as an author and artist. And it's not that anyone is bankrolling me. I'm not bankrolled. I don't have a foundation supporting me. I don't have an inheritance. My partner does not support me in any way. I earn all the money I use. And that is part and parcel of my work. It's not secondary. Okay, go.
No, that's super interesting. And it's true, like it's a bit of a shame how people think talking about money is uncouth, or like wrong in some way. But I think in this country too, like partly the pandemic has really thrown into really stark relief the precarious condition of freelance artists and freelance writers and freelance directors. And most playwrights in this country can't support themselves just by writing plays. They have to go into TV and film, or they have to take other jobs as well. And I think you're completely right when you say that in the theater, at least, the privilege and the prestige of the writer is greater. I think screenwriters can often feel quite dispensable. At least that's what I get, the reaction I get from my colleagues. Also, just to slightly quibble with the premise of this panel discussion, this is called Women in Indian Theatre, but by no means am I suggesting, or is anyone suggesting that the work is defined by gender. I don't, it's any more than like my work is defined by being a man or by being Indian. It's more about putting them on stage in this same week together has been more about redressing a historical imbalance that's existed for however many centuries and years. Sorry, I'll shut up now, but Prarthana, do you have anything that chimes with your experience or your research? Or?
Sure, I mean, I suppose I just want to pick up on what Annie and Manjula have both pointed out, which is that a lot of Indian theatre practice that I was exposed to growing up in Calcutta was very much a gig economy, even though you had a state subsidized theatre in Bengal. And a lot of the theatre companies did receive funds from the state. It was actually pittance. So in my experience, most of the people who were engaged with the theatre would have a 9-to-5 job, and then rehearsals would start in the evening after 5 or 6 o'clock and then carry on late into the night. And that's how theatre groups survived. So I absolutely agree with Manjula and Annie that, you know, it isn't uncouth to talk about financing theatre or how to make it sustainable economically. How do theatre artists put food on the table is a very important question to ask. And in India, even though a lot of theatre was state subsidized, certainly in the 80s and 90s till the early 2000s, in my experience, even the salaries that we received from the Sangeet Natak Academy, which was the patron that offered salaries for dancers and theatre makers, it was 3,000 rupees a month. And even in the late 90s and early 2000s, you couldn't have, you as a 20-something, you couldn't think of a life with 3,000 rupees a month, right? So again, there were some very hard decisions to be taken then. And I know that artists today also are pushed to make some very hard decisions about livelihood and how theatre or dance practice can become a sustainable livelihood. And in most instances, it isn't. So it is primarily a very precarious gig economy in India. And I think that needs to be addressed, because if you want to grow the next generation of writers, directors, producers, then you have to understand how that economy works and you have to provide more support. And I think under the conditions of neoliberalism, there is an increasing kind of a retreat of the government in promoting or even sort of funding arts initiatives. And it's primarily crowdfunded or corporate sponsored events that enable theatre or dance or experimental work to thrive. And I'm in contact with several of these collectives working out of New Delhi, for instance, the Gati Forum. Many of these very young, enterprising artists are coming together in groups and they write, they're scholars, they're teaching at university departments, they're making wonderful experimental work. But it is a very precarious economy that they're part of. And I think there needs to be much more done to support this generation of work. And just to kind of address this notion, Atri, I absolutely agree that there is a whole history of experimental practice in India that tends to be forgotten when we look at theatre practice in Britain. So while I'm an absolute champion for the work that comes out of the diaspora, and I think many of our playwrights who come from the South Asian diaspora, whether they're Pakistani or Indian or Bangladeshi playwrights who are currently making work, I think it's absolutely crucial that there's more platform given to their writing and to them as directors and makers of theatre in Britain. But somehow in that wonderful celebration of experimentation in the here and the now, we often tend to forget that there is a whole history of experimental practice in the South Asian subcontinent. And often, and this is certainly my experience working in university departments as well, and this is why decolonizing the curriculum is such an important conversation to have, is that the canon, the classical canon, the Natya Shastra, the works of the ancient playwrights, the works of sort of, the classical theatre and dance traditions, they tend to circulate in academic departments, much more than very experimental South Asian playwriting or directing. And what that tends to lead to is a very, very clear division between a kind of world theater or world dance kind of model, where very classical work, very traditional work is kind of talked about whenever you talk about South Asian work. And whenever you teach adaptation or experimental work, you then tend to go to either British writing or British Asian writing. And I think that that's something that I'm very much interested in changing, because I think there's lots of wonderful experimental writing that comes out from the early 20th century onwards, that comes out of Indian writing, that can be adapted into plays, that students can be taught in departments. But unfortunately, there's a very Orientalist view still that survives in academic departments that tends to treat the Indian classical canon as the canon that can be taught. And so any kind of contemporary experimental writing is erased, and women's place within that writing doubly erased, I think. But again, just to kind of wrap up, in my experience growing up in Bengal, there were amazing novelists like Mahashika Devi, who was a brilliant political activist and a writer and a novelist whose works were being adapted for the theatre and being presented by Indian theatre directors such as Usha Ganguly. So Rudali Hazar Chaurasi Ki Ma, or Hajar Chorashi Ma in Bengali. So all of these amazing texts were being written by women writers and adapted by women theatre directors, but these never enter the British curriculum. So whenever you teach the British curriculum, it's either, in some very remote pockets in academic departments across the country, it's the canon, it's the classical canon, or it's experimental writing. And I think we need to do more in promoting experimental writing from South Asia. So I really welcome and I think this is a very timely and an urgent conversation to be having, Atri. So thank you for curating the series of new writing that you're doing at the moment.
Thank you. It's super. I'm going to pick your brains later. Yes, Manjula.
Before because we're going to wrap very soon, I want to mention a book by Shirley Houston Findlay, who heads the Department of Theatre in the College of Worcester in Ohio. A great book that she wrote and published a couple of years ago. It's called Disparate Voices of Indian Women Playwrights. And I would guess that for people interested specifically in Indian women playwrights, this is a must read. I think my screen is mirrored, so I don't know if it is in mirror reverse. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I just had to say that, and I had it ready to show. So I just wanted to say that. Please, I don't want to horn in.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, we've got about 5 or so minutes left. One of the things that just to pick up on what you were saying, Prarthana, I think the thing that happens with South Asian work in this country, at least, is that it often falls into lots of cliches of sort of, I don't know, sort of what I call saris glistening in the moonlight and the scent of turmeric on the breeze. And it's one of the things that really, really excited me about both Name, Place, Animal, Thing and Hidden Fires. They were both portraits of contemporary life, and they didn't fall into those cliches at all for me, I think. And with Name, Place, Animal, Thing, it was about the story of Nancy, which isn't a story and the story of like domestic servants, which isn't a story that's ever really told in this country at all. I mean, you hear about it in Victorian Britain, but I don't think it was brilliant to bring that story to light. And I think with Hidden Fires and the monologue from Hidden Fires we're doing, in the wake of so much sectarian and violence that's going on across the world, it felt, and in this country too, like it felt really pertinent to bring it to stage. So I'm just so saying I really feel what you're saying, and I would like, both in academic circles, but I think also in theatrical circles, for us to do more work by writers like Annie and Manjula. Sorry, again, I'll shut up. Is there anything anyone wanted to just pitch in the last 5 minutes, just about I'm really interested. Sorry, yes, Annie, you go.
One thing I wanted to pick up on, taking off from what Manjula just showed us a book, and Prarthana was also saying earlier. You know, one of the things that has happened in India, I know for certain that this is a problem. When you mentioned Mahashika Devi, etc., I was exposed to her work through books. Even the ones that were turned into plays, the scripts of those I read as books, not as theatrical productions. I think one of the things that has happened over the last 10, 15 years is that publishing of plays has taken a very big hit. Nobody does plays anymore as text. And I mean, everything that I was exposed to in terms of script, you know, I did grow up reading scripts, and therefore, in a way, in my internal mental landscape, I had some access to a kind of theater, you know, the play that goes on in your head when you read a script. All of that has completely collapsed. And one of the reasons is, of course, publishing as an industry, the way it works, etc. It also places severe limitations on me as a playwright. For example, when I had Name, Place, Animal Thing, okay, it got shortlisted for a major prize. And then over the years, Manjula mentioned the prize for my, the Hindu Playwright Prize I got for my newest play. That was very experimental, extremely experimental. I was very unsure anyone would even want to perform a play like that. My experience in the Bombay theater scene does tell me that people are extremely reluctant to touch anything that is form breaking in a sense. And my new script, Untitled one, was kind of breaking form in a sense, moving between prose and kind of dialogue driven scenes. But how do I even show anyone my work? I may know 5 directors, and I might send those 5 directors my script, and they may or may not want to do it. But what about the hundreds of directors that are out there all over the country or elsewhere in the world? If I don't publish my plays, how does the text reach them? It's sitting on my computer, right? Earlier, you would publish a play and somebody out there would publish it. And even if somebody's just done one show of it somewhere, it would get printed, and other people would keep an eye out for new plays in that way, right? But new playwrights, or maybe not new playwrights, old playwrights, whoever the playwrights are, you had access to text, and that access has been completely snapped. So in the arts, you need bridges, right? And the publishing of the text is a very vital bridge for the text itself to survive and find new audiences. And I find that has snapped, and I got very lucky that somehow my play, because of the prize, because of a little bit of attention on me in that very brief period, somebody noticed and said, I want to publish your play. And then I snuck in 2 other scripts saying, hey, you're publishing 1 play, why don't you publish 3 of my plays instead? And that happened for me, but it doesn't happen for everybody. And I think that is something which we who work in the arts need to talk a little bit more about, the publishing of texts.
And that's how I came across Name, Place, Animal Thing, because it's in that collected edition. And we had the assistant director on Name, Place, Animal Thing is a woman called Anisha Srinivasan, and she used to work at Prithvi when I think you did So Many Socks, Annie, and so she was very excited to come on board with this. But that's the thing, like how does one access a play like So Many Socks? Is that available in a book as well, or is that no?
No, So Many Socks was a commissioned piece, and I mean, that's a slightly more complex thing in the sense that do I own it or do they own it and things like that. But that is the thing, that every time there are some people who just leave a comment on my blog saying, hey, can we read your play? And if they're lucky and I'm lucky, I'll see the comment and I'll respond. But otherwise, there's no other way.
Well, hopefully more work will reach these stages soon, at least. We should probably wrap up. I'm just wondering if anyone has any closing comments or remarks or thoughts or feelings or anything they might want to offer.
I'd like to make a couple of points. Because there are two Bengalis, I want to make a point. My name is Manjula, not Manjula. That's very minor. I would like to say that one of the constraints I have argued against, it's not fought against, is the constraint of being regarded as feminist just because one is a woman. And I feel, however wonderful the movement has been, and I believe it has been very empowering for women, it has, in my opinion, become something of a constraint, because many of us who happen to be women also happen to have thoughts beyond feminism. And just as Hidden Fires is not specifically about women's issues, and as I understand it, Name, Place, Animal Thing is also not necessarily about women, I feel that while discussing women's issues, we also need to go beyond gender, beyond the constraint of being, it's like being in a, in a harem. Just because you're a woman, you're in that room which produces work specific to women. And I believe this may be amongst the reasons. I mean, on the one hand, feminism offers the fact that there are feminist scholars and scholarships specific to women and women's studies. Women get a platform. But if, as a woman, one wants to address a broader spectrum of ideas, then if you don't write specifically about women, then you are, your work becomes focused in, sort of corralled into a specific series of ideas. And I'm not sure that that has, in the long run, that is really helpful. I mean, we don't think of Shakespearean plays as being men's plays. And I would like, if I had my options, I would like to be regarded as just a playwright, not a woman playwright, because that is how I live. I live as an artist and an author. I don't wake up every day saying, oh, I'm a woman waking up. I don't think that. And I don't live like that. So I would like to encourage people who are in the arts to go beyond their gender definitions. And anyway, that's, I mean, I could go on, of course, but I'll stop there. You're yeah.
I totally hear you. And I think the thing about, for me, it was about what the platform is. And I think what the Almeida Theatre can offer as a space, rather than, yeah, as you said, choosing to, like, neither Hidden Fires nor Name, Place, Animal Thing are about women's issues. And obviously I'm not in a position to speak about women's issues, as I'm just a director approaching these texts as plays rather than as women's plays. So I hear what you're saying, absolutely. We should probably wrap up, but thank you so much to Annie, Manjula, and Prarthana for this brilliant discussion. And we could literally have kept talking for hours. I'm really keen to hear more about what all of you have to say. Alas, time does not allow that. But thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's been watching. And hope to see you soon. And Hidden Fires is this evening at 7 p.m. And I'm really looking forward to it. And I'll send you the recording, Manjula, but you don't have to watch it if you don't want to.
I'll force myself. How's that?
Thank you very
then
much.
thank you everyone. Thank you Almeida Theatre for inviting all of us. And how nice to meet you, Prarthana, and nice to see you again, Annie, and good to meet you, Atri, as well. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.